All right, hello everybody. Welcome to this episode of All the Good Men. And today we have Imari Tuakli joining us, and this is our bachelor number something. Not sure exactly what we're at right now. Oh, but Imari is an incredible, incredible human being. He is a personal development coach and also a keynote speaker. He's worked with thousands of artists, leaders, entrepreneurs, and he really supports them all in bringing purpose, bringing confidence, bringing authenticity back into their lives. People who are doing epic things, helping them to really make it more them and even more incredible. And he has spoken in all different sorts of places. And this is part of what I really admire and respect about the work you do. You've spoken in at Harvard Medical School. You've spoken to Los Angeles homeless shelters. You have coached audiences from ranging from federal prisoners all the way to Silicon Valley hotshots. I say all the way, although you never know where crossover happens. So and Imari has done incredible work on social media and given really beautiful speeches that you could also listen to on YouTube, bringing these really incredible, potent ideas to tons of people. People really, really appreciate and value the ways that Imari thinks and the ways that Imari looks at the world and supports people and really bringing what it is that they do in a really authentic, natural way to them. So, welcome, Imari. It is so good to have you here.
Thanks, love. That I feel. Just to be honest, I've done a lot of like podcasts, and I'm like, I don't know if I've ever felt so seen. Like maybe like I'm usually like tuning out when people read my bio, but you reading it, and I was like, this guy sounds great. So thank you for that. I really it was meaningful for me. I appreciate
So seen by the bio that you mostly wrote yourself, but that I
it.
also I've I definitely added my flourishes and my own understanding of your work.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Something about the flourishes that just made it feel very like, oh, this is nice. It doesn't feel like a Wikipedia article anymore, you know?
totally. I know bios can be such a funny, awkward
Yeah,
thing to
definitely.
write about ourselves. I have a whole document that's like all the different bios that I've ever written for myself, and it's so funny to try and write bios that are both actually interesting and represent who we truly are and not
Yeah,
sound just like a Wikipedia article, but that also are clear and concise. And
yeah.
yeah.
Great practice in self awareness is writing your own bio.
Yeah.
It's like, there you go. First tip of the day, audience. There you go. Write your own bio.
Uh-huh, absolutely. I've also had friends, I've been like, could you write me a 3 sentence bio? Can you tell me about myself in a few sentences? And it's actually been really supportive from my own observation of self and understanding how what I do is perceived by the people who know me best. It's a cool, it was actually given to me as an assignment.
Shout out to that person. That sounds like an amazing assignment. I'm already like going through my mind. I'm like, who would I trust to write my bio? There's some people I'm like, nah, nah, I don't want to about me. But yeah, good suggestion. Thank you for that.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about you now that I've
Mm,
read your bio in such an exquisitely insightful way. Tell me more about you. What have you
yeah.
been doing? What have you been learning about recently? Where are you at? What's going on in your life?
Mm. I'll just there's when somebody says tell you about yourself, there's like so many ways you can go. So I'm just gonna start with something. Then if you want to change direction and shift lanes and put on your blinker and we can shift lanes. But I'll start with this. I think this is what's on my mind because my next talk that I'm giving, I think I'm allowed to talk about it. And if I'm not, oh well. But my next talk is in Reno, and I'm speaking to a couple hundred entrepreneurs and startup founders, and I'm talking to them about the concept of ideas. And so the idea of ideas has really been on my mind lately because it's what I have to rehearse and make this talk about. And as you were introducing me and you were like, oh, Mari, he like shares his ideas on like social media. Um, it's so interesting to hear that reflected back to me because I think that, to be honest, like what I am known for and what I've made a living for myself off of is sharing ideas, spreading ideas, helping people find the right idea and the puzzle piece that would help them unlock their life if they had the right idea. And yet at the same time, if someone were to feel into my body, feel into my mind when I'm coming up with an idea, it's actually quite stressful. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, does this make sense? Like anytime I'm putting together an idea, I hopefully I work through this. Maybe I'll work through it, but I have this like self consciousness about like,
Mm.
When this is expressed, will it be understood?
Right.
And I think maybe the difference between me and other people, or people who, say that there's a difference between them, is that I'll still express it. Is that even though I still feel that uncomfortable anxiety and that self-consciousness of, is this going to make sense? I'm like, I feel like I understand it better when it is understood by someone else.
Yeah.
And so, me as a speaker, I think part of the reason that I am an effective speaker is because I have a very deep desire to be understood.
Mm.
So, because I desire to be understood, I really put a lot of focus and intention and energy and care in how I craft my words.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, and I feel like that comes when we really truly believe in our ideas, when we are in integrity with our own thoughts and beliefs, and we want to be able to communicate the way that we have navigated our inner understanding so that other people can receive what it is that we have been spending time thinking about and
Exactly.
trying to understand and trying to bring a new light to or shine a new light on.
Yes.
Um,
And when you communicate, if you really think about it, I think Jordan Peterson talks about this. When you communicate, whether you're writing something or you're speaking something, you're moving something from this ethereal void of feeling and emotion and kind of like somatic energy, and you have to formulate it into words.
yeah,
So by formulating it into a word, you're understanding how you think. Like, you're also learning how you think, right? When I journal a lot, and when I journal, I'm reading back my journal, I'm like, oh, this guy, interesting. Which I can only know because he slash I had to put it into words. And so I think that there is a understanding that is only available once a human being is willing to put their experience into a digestible word.
yeah, there's like there's that saying about how we, I don't know exactly what the saying is. Something about how we learn something so much more deeply when we teach it,
Yeah.
when we're actually teaching it or sharing about it. And I
Yeah.
notice for myself when I'm having an idea that's kind of half formulated and I speak about it to anyone, often it's like my mom when I'm in the car and I'm like, I'm having this idea. Let me just blabber about it for 5 minutes. But that act of external communication of it helps me so much. It's a very different thing than if I, for example, if I write about it, it brings a certain layer of clarity. And then if I communicate it to somebody else, that brings another layer of clarity. And it's like each one creates a different angle on the same idea.
Oh, it's so cool. Oh, this is the kind of stuff that gets my brain just going. I love this kind of shit. Thank you so much. It's like, and like, let's take, for example, like you're on the phone with your mom, who I met at the wedding. Super cool, wonderful lady. And you're on the phone with your mom, and you're like, okay, mom, I have this idea that's like half formulated. And as you are speaking it, it is forming. I can't underspeak how important that is, because a lot of times when somebody's like trying to form an idea, people cut them off, right? Or they're like, oh no, I get it, or this is what you're trying to say. It's like, no, let the thing be birthed first,
Right.
right? In real time. And I think a lot of people don't communicate their ideas until it's fully formed in their mind, and they're like, and now presenting my no, let it happen in real time. And I think that, for example, this talk that I'm giving in September, to a bunch of like startup founders, whatever, I want to communicate to them how to best foster their employees to be creative. And one of the ways that you do that is stop cutting them off.
Mm.
Let them come with half baked ideas. Give them permission to not have it fully figured out, because you can figure it out in real time if you allow it.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I think there's a bunch of like coaching lessons and stuff in there, but we'll
I
get
love it.
there.
I love it. It's so funny. I'm such an ideas person. I'm constantly having ideas to the point where I can like sometimes exhaust myself. Well, actually, only if I try to carry out every idea. That's when I exhaust myself. But Jeff and I have this. Remember once he said to me, he was like, babe, I don't think I can hear any more ideas today. was
Wow, you did a great Jeff impression. That was amazing.
it was so good, and then it brought me some great awareness around how much of the day I'd be like, "I have this brilliant idea. I have this brilliant idea."
That was Jeff. That was a very Jeff moment.
He's
I
like,
love it.
"Tomorrow, bring it." But
Yeah,
today
but he's like, we've hit our quota for today. Yeah.
Oh, bless
Yeah.
that man.
That's actually one of the other things that I am talking about in Reno is okay, once you have a lot of ideas, how do you know which one to follow? Right.
Mm,
And I think that
mm,
uh, there's tactical things that I am going to offer them, but one of the most fundamental things is follow the feeling, right? There are some ideas that come from my head, and there are some ideas that come from my heart. And if I am able to recognize the surge and the rush of adrenaline when I have an idea, I'm like, oh,
mm,
like that's what I mean. Like when you message me and you're like, hey, do you want to do this podcast? I like notice how my body was like, oh, that could be fun. It's
yeah,
like versus some people might ask me and my body's like, meh, right? Like not very interested.
right.
So having a relationship with the part of yourself that is beyond the mind that
Mm,
tells you which one to follow.
yeah,
That's also important.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then what about when you hit up against a challenge with that idea in the production, and then all of a sudden you wanna stop and switch to another idea?
Fun, wow, it's something like you like read the script from my talk. It's like everything we're talking about is like exactly what you addressed in the thing. Follow me on this hypothesis. I don't think that you are ever going to execute any idea that is worth executing that will not come with problems. Like every every interesting thing you will ever try to do will be difficult. At some point, you will have some problem, you will have some obstacle, right? So that's not a reason not to do an idea. However, that initial surge, that feeling that me and you were just talking about, that's motivation.
Mhm,
You need motivation in order to overcome an obstacle, in order to overcome a problem, right? So if you know that problems are coming, why not go with the idea that is already fueled by the most motivation and the most energy so that you can overcome those problems, so you can overcome those obstacles, right? It's like if somebody else other than you had asked me to do a podcast that I wasn't interested in, and then I get on the podcast and, like the mic's not working or, the internet's going out, I was just like, God damn, why am I even doing this? Like, I don't even care to be here, right? But if it happened to us, I'd be like, all right, cool. All right, I have the motivation, I have the surge to figure it out,
right,
right? So that I think is the problems that you should be pursuing is the ones that your body tells you, I'm going to figure this out.
right.
This is worth figuring out to me.
Yeah. I had this really interesting experience. It started maybe 6 months ago, and I had this, I'll call it an idea, a feeling of this offering that I knew was a huge part of my work. And it
Mm,
all came in like a second.
mm,
My body started shaking. I felt like I was somewhere else. I felt like I was on psychedelics all of a sudden. It was totally random. It all landed, the whole, like so many aspects of it landed. And there was tons of energy around it for like a day or two. And so I was utilizing that because I know that when the muse comes, gotta catch, hold
act,
on.
do it. Yeah.
And then after a few days, it just dropped. It just totally dropped out. And
Mm-hmm.
I every time I tried to work on it, it felt like I was pushing something. So I
Mm-hmm.
kind of just let it go and had this like, okay, I've put some effort in. I'm placing it here. I built an altar for it, which I do for all of my offerings. I have a space to come to where I can communicate with that, the entity that it is in and of itself, the being that it is.
Yeah.
And then I a couple weeks later had a one-on-one intensive, like a 2 or 3 day intensive. And the essence of that offering was basically what this guy was working with. And all these realizations came through for him. All of this sort of information came through for him that was so linked to this idea that I'd had.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I sort of felt like, okay, well, maybe that was just there because of that. Maybe that the intensity of that came through to sort of prepare me for that intensive.
Yeah.
And then a month later, it came back in and it was like, but there's this other piece. It wants to take form. It wants to shift. And what I realized was that I couldn't push it. The idea was there, but once I started to get too much in my head around, okay, now I've got the idea, now I've got to make all the pieces happen, it actually started to be like, nope, I'm going to take my time. I need to happen, especially because it feels like such a deep part of my life's work. I keep having this feeling around it where it's like, let it come in, and then don't put it all the way aside. Don't forget about it, but let it come in breaths and pulses, and let it be that creative process that's also not me avoiding the thing.
Yes, 100%. You're like edging ideas. I
Yeah,
love
totally.
it. I love it. It's
Totally.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that, me and you are using this vehicle, this mechanism of ideas, but it's so interesting. As you're talking, I'm like, oh, this actually applies in so many levels. Like, thinking about like relationship, right? It's like, I just exited a relationship not too long ago, and it's this at first like, oh my god, okay, this thing, I have this idea, this motivation, this momentum, oh my god, and then you're like
Mhm.
all in, right? And then in some ways, it's like, how do you know when to, yes, apply the creative force to like mold it and meld it in a certain way, and when do you let it breathe so it can let it become what it's meant to become? And you can use that in a relationship. You can use that, imagine if you're like raising a child, right? You're like, okay, I just had a kid, I'm so excited, amazing, he's going to be a football player and he's going to go to the NFL, and it's like, okay, that's great, and I'm glad you're excited about your son, but like also, uh, how can it move at the pace that it was designed to move? But you know that as soon as it needs you to show up, you are there to show up,
Right.
right? Yeah, because it's not just like, I'm going to put it on the shelf and like, when the cosmos call me, it's like, no, you have to also be listening and like, no, like, okay, cool, like
Yeah.
I can give it enough breath so that it can breathe itself, but I can also show up for it when it needs support.
I love this stuff. I want to shift gears a little bit into the realms of masculinity, talking about masculinity. And first and foremost, I want to hear from you what healthy masculinity means. What does that look like? What does the term healthy masculinity mean to you?
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I am at the bleeding edge of practicing what I believe masculinity to be, and not because I'm like some frontier, like at the leading edge of the frontier. I just think that it's been like very difficult for me to like integrate, because for me, masculinity is holding the line. It's setting a standard, setting a boundary, being like, this is what this is, right? It's like, the analogy I give is like a basketball court, right? Like anything can happen on a basketball court, almost anything. It's like slam dunks, crossovers, fouls, whistle blowing, like so many things can happen on a basketball court, but it happens within the lines, right? So the lines tell you this is where the game starts, this is where the game ends, but within it, create, do, become, make all the things, right? And I think that when you don't have that, it's like a game without rules. If I sat you right here, Fabi, and I was like, "Hey, let's play a game," and you're like, "Okay, Mari," and I'm like, "All right, cool, you go first." You'd be like, "Well, what do I, what do I do?" Right? Because the game needs rules, the game needs structure, the game needs organization,
I
right?
actually would
And
love to play that game.
I would just be just
See
like,
what
"Stop."
happens.
Like, okay, and it's like 3 hours later. It's like, am I winning? Um, and so the reason I say that it's like the bleeding edge and difficult for me is like, I for myself have witnessed time and time again how difficult it is for me to set the line, to hold the line, to commit to the line. Not because I don't know what the line should be, not because I am incapable of doing so, but because of my fear, especially in the world that we live in right now, of like how that may come across. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, well, who does he think he is? Or, oh, he's being toxic, or, oh, that's the patriarchy, it's the power. It's like my fear of doing that has, the only thing that I could become in response to the fear is passive. And it's like the referee being like, oh, yeah, you guys can dribble out of bounds. Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
It's like, yeah, you guys want to just go in the stands and play basketball? Yeah, that's fine. It's like eventually we lose the game, right? Eventually there is no game that can be played, right? And so my journey recently, lately, is me remembering, oh, I am able to hold a line in a way that supports myself and the people around me
Yeah.
very well. And I can now confront all the fears that have prevented me from doing so in the past, which is the fears of like, oh, how's somebody gonna take it? Or, oh, especially like when that boundary is in relationship with women. Like, how is the woman going to feel? Like, is she going to feel like I'm taking too much control and blah 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 blah, right? So it's a practice that I'm active in
Mm,
as we speak.
beautiful. And I find when that's done with awareness, when that setting of a line or a boundary, it's almost like creating the riverbed that the river can run within. When that is set with attunement and awareness and in a healthy way, it's not controlling. It's actually deeply safe.
Exactly. It actually promotes the opposite of control, which is creation, right? It's like it promotes like, hey, these are the lines, go play,
Mm,
right? It's a client that I have. Uh, he he suffers from nice guy syndrome, right? Like does this whole super nice guy thing, and he's been doing it for a minute. And he talks about similar to you and Jeff's story. He talks about how his partner is always like, "Oh yeah, babe, we should move here, and babe, we should do this." And the next day, it's like, "Oh, but babe, what if we do this?" And he's because he wants to be a nice guy, because he wants to be loving. He's like, "Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, sure." And he's ended up in a couple situations recently where he's like, "What are we doing here? Like, we didn't need to be here. We didn't need to do this, and now this is costing us money. This is costing us time. This is whatever, whatever." And recently, when I checked in with him, I was like, "What do you actually want? And how is that in alignment with what she wants?" And he's like,
right,
"Oh, I want to actually move to this country by this date." I was like, "Cool, great. Have a conversation with her and say, babe, this is what we're gonna do."
right.
It's one of the ideas that we've been playing with, so it's not like I'm just choosing. It's not just control. It's like, hey, babe, but this thing that we already know we want to do, let's just commit to it. This is what's happening, and from there we can build a life together and do all these amazing things. But there has to be some decision point. There
Yeah,
has to be, this is the line, because if every day we change our minds, and if every day we're going to be living in a different place, like there's no security there. There's no safety there. Uh, you can't create from there. So,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and I think so many people have this feeling, whether it's conscious or unconscious, that you're either a nice guy or you're an asshole. It's like either I'm the nice guy who goes along with it, who is always um, doing my best to be nice, be sweet in the situation, or I'm a total dick. And for me, what I see as healthy masculinity is not very much neither of those. It's I would say the whole space in between, but it's like the whole space around that that sort of very small polarity right in there. And it's when when you set clear boundaries, when you hold that line, when you make a clear choice, decision, direction, that doesn't take away from kindness in any way. Right? The nice guy syndrome is like, I'm not even listening to myself. I'm not setting any boundaries or structure because I believe that I need to be the nice guy in order to be loved. And then I'm building resentment behind the scenes. But there's a way to have all of that inner power, all of that direction, and be deeply, deeply kind and to listen really, really, really well. I mean, you see, a good king, he doesn't just decide this and that and this and completely ignore everything. He takes in everything that his people says. He takes in what his queen sees as she perceives everyone, as she hears what everyone's saying. He takes it all in and then makes the choice.
right, which is essentially presence, right?
Mm.
It's like I'm able to see, like, okay, this is the actual situation that we're in. It's not just like I'm just off in some kingly chamber somewhere, just being like, oh, here's the royal decree. Here, you guys have to do this now. Here's the new law. It's like, no, I'm with the people. I'm present to what the people need. I know what's happening here in this moment, and based on that, here is the offering. Here is the line, the boundary, the whatever you want to call it, right? But you can only do that in a quote unquote healthy way if you are present to what you are applying the boundary to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Do
Yeah.
you feel like you grew up with healthy examples of masculinity of men around you?
Um, I would say, because of the fact that I have to think about it, the answer would be no. So I actually grew up with my mom, primarily, who, ironically enough, was, if we're talking about a spectrum, I would say leaned much more masculine.
Mm.
Um, like I didn't feel tender love from her at any point really in my entire life. Um, and I had my dad, but they were divorced, and so I only saw him like a couple times a month. Um, And if there was like a power dynamic between the two of them, it was definitely in her favor, right? So having like a strong, regularly present masculine figure in my life just didn't happen
Mm.
growing up. Yeah. And I think, you know, who knows why, but I didn't really entertain or embrace this conversation of masculinity until like the end of 2022. Like prior to that, I was like, this whole toxic masculinity thing, and I was just like, this is such a binary conversation, and I don't want to be part of it. I'm just Amari. I'm free. Who cares? Da 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 da. Right? And then I was actually approached by another coach to do a men's retreat, and I was like, initially, I was like, I'm not interested. Like, I'm not. I don't feel specially called to the issues of men. Right? I just feel called to the issues of people. Period. Right? But then as I was like digging into it and uncovering it, I was like, actually, I do feel like there is this part of me that is missing when it comes to masculinity. It's like I miss the feeling of masculinity, which is like
Mm.
it's people it gets a bad rap, but the word competition, edge, pushing yourself, living like with both feet on the ground, strong. Like I realized I had been missing that feeling of like real earth grounded, like just this primal energy. Yeah. And so I eventually said yes to the coach who wanted to do the men's retreats for me. And we designed really, I can safely say, one of a kind men's retreats. And in the process of that, it was also for me to reconnect to that and to be like, oh, okay, like as I'm designing and supporting the space, I'm recognizing how much what I needed is also what other people needed, and how much what other men needed is what I needed. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because as I'm hearing you say this, there are such different there's masculine energy, there's masculinity, then there's men, and it's like these
So many
terms
words,
all have so many different ways of being interpreted. And
yeah.
right, masculine energy, it's an energy that is within all of us. It's something that we all have, masculine and feminine. There's this dance moving between us. My dear friend Ori, who
Mhm.
you know, he
Mhm.
he talks about it where he's like it's like your left and your right hand. You have one
Mhm.
that is more dominant, but
Mhm.
it's going to be a lot harder to live with just one.
Yes.
And so with masculine energy, we all have it. It is something that we can cultivate. It is that riverbed that we create. It is the structure that we can live within.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then masculinity, and this is part of why I like to ask, well, what does healthy masculinity mean to you? It has so many different, like, is it a specific flavor of manhood? Is it a specific embodiment of masculine energy? And then we just have men. And then within that, it's like, well, then are we talking about masculinity in terms of um, healthy examples of within men, whatever the energy is within that? So there's like all these different terms that have so many different interpretations. Do you have anything you want to add to what I just shared there?
Yeah, I mean, it's got my brain working. I think that again, it's so difficult to kind of like sum it up because there's so many different words. But what comes to me is just like masculine energy just being the clear, concise, direct, reduced focus of things, where it's just like this is the goal, this is the mission, this is what's happening, and whether that mission is like we're going to build this family, we're going to make $100,000 in the next month, we're going to take ourselves back in shape. It's like a reduction of like, oh, I'm going to stress about all these 847. It's like this is what's happening right now.
Mhm.
This is what's going on. Yeah, and I think that it's so interesting. Shout out to Ori because that was a great analogy that you just gave with the right hand, left hand. It's so interesting as you were describing. You have your left hand, you have your right hand, and one hand might be more dominant. It's so interesting because as you said that, I noticed the part of me that resisted my own masculinity was resisting the dominant part of me because it was afraid of making someone feel dominated,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And like growing up with my mother, who we've spoken about, uh, that woman was extremely dominating,
Mm,
right? Like there was no breath in that house,
right.
right? And so, because I have a very clear resonance of what that feels like, I think I've hyper corrected and been like, oh, I don't want to ever make anybody feel that way,
Mm.
which is not, I get where it's coming from, but it's not useful.
Right.
Like, just the role that I played in my life and have played in my life, right? Before I was coaching, I was a film director. It's like the film director needs to be able to say, this is what we're doing, this is not what we're doing. Like, otherwise, you don't have a cohesive vision, right? And I remember even as a director, I was like afraid. I'm like, I'd be afraid to tell people, like, no, we're doing this, because I didn't want anybody to feel small. I didn't want anybody to feel like I was taking advantage of them and like not conscious of their feelings, whatever, right? So it's, my thing is, how can I trust that my dominance will not make someone feel dominated, and that I
Right.
am not wrong for being dominant?
Right.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the thing when we don't have healthy positive examples of that growing up, of healthy, we'll call it masculinity for the
Yeah.
sake of this conversation. When we don't have healthy examples of that, then we fight against it by actually cutting off a piece of ourselves, by
Yeah.
actually cutting off the healthy representation of that same energy.
Mhm.
And so it's like we get to then become, and all of y'all listening as men, you get to become the healthy example of that energy, of healthy anger,
Mhm.
healthy dominance,
Mhm.
healthy direction. And
Mhm.
when you come from a background of well, I definitely don't want to do it like any of those people,
Right. Right.
it can be challenging to then think to yourself, well, how do I want to do it? How do I want to show up? What does healthy anger even look like?
Right.
Does that even exist?
Right.
And to actually cultivate and practice being the healthy version of that for yourself,
Mhm.
for your sons, for your
Mhm.
daughters,
Mhm.
for all the people around you in your life.
Yeah.
It's no easy feat, but it's like the most important thing. It's the
100%.
most important thing.
Oh, so good. We're in the gold mine now. I'm like, my brain shooting off is amazing. Thank you. It's so two things in response to that. One is like the question that arises in response to that whole mom thing that we just went into, is a question that myself, you, anybody in the world can ask themselves, is how have I overcompensated for the hurt that I have experienced? Right? So for me, example is like, oh, okay, I was dominated when I was younger. So I was like, oh, let me not be dominant. And it's like, okay, well, how has that caused more pain for myself? Right? And then the other thing that I'll say, when we think about anger, right? Typically people think of that as like masculine energy, right? And if you really boil down what is anger, anger just means one of my boundaries was crossed, right? And so if you don't have anger, either you live in a magical world where nobody's ever crossing your boundaries, or it means you just don't have any boundaries, right? And you're just letting people cross them all the time, which is the exact opposite of what we just said masculinity is, which is like, here's the line, here's the boundary, do not
Mm.
cross it. I think there's this weird pride in me for like a couple of years where I was like, oh, I don't get angry. And in that time, I got angry like maybe like twice, right? And it was like when extremely my boundaries were crossed, right? And I had like this pride of like, oh, I don't get angry. And then I remember I started feeling angry, and I was like, oh shit, this is like free testosterone. Like I'm like, it was like I feel so much more energized. I feel
Yeah.
so able to focus on things. I feel so much more direct. I save so much more time. The contrast on life gets turned up. The energy on life gets turned up, right? And I was like avoiding that because I was like, oh well, I don't want to be a bad angry man and
Yeah.
anger. It's like, oh my god, what a waste! Like
Yeah.
you have this jetpack that you're just ignoring because of this idea of what you think it'll be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And when we aren't able to sit with the sensations of something, then we're not in when we can't be with it, then we have to do something about it. And then there's some big expression that, if we're not in relationship to it, often is unhealthy. And something I see is that I personally wouldn't necessarily think of anger as a particularly masculine thing, but what I do see is that we're conditioned in different ways. And what I see is that men are often conditioned that if they are angry, that makes them dangerous. And
Mm,
women are often conditioned that if they are angry, that makes them crazy.
crazy. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that we have these different conditionings around what it means about us if we get angry, or what could happen if
Mhm.
we get angry. And then we shut down that part of ourselves, and we don't allow the expression or even the sensation of it to move through us, which would actually give us so much more energy, so much more power, so much more turn on too.
Yeah. And if you are afraid of being angry as a man because you're afraid of being dangerous, or as a woman, if you're afraid of being angry because you're afraid of being crazy, either way, you are saying, I do not trust myself. If a woman is afraid of being crazy, it's like, well, do you think you're crazy? Like, it would be very direct to the point. If you think, oh, yeah, you might have a little case of the schizophrenia, it's like, all right, cool. Let's talk to a doctor, right? Or if a guy's like, oh, I'm going to be so dangerous and I'm going to do something that like is so terrible. It's like, do you actually think that's who you are? Right? So it's a question of, do I trust myself or not?
Right. And I think what complicates that is that when it's deep in our subconscious and unconscious, it's
Hmm.
beyond the conscious, like I believe this about myself or not. It's this like, if society sees me as dangerous or crazy, I will
Hmm.
die, right? To the like deepest
Hmm.
parts of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's this deep threat of, will I lose control? Or even, I know I'm not a bad, dangerous guy, but if I let that out, I might actually
Yeah,
hurt someone, even if it's just their feelings. Do
right.
I see myself as a deeply, altogether dangerous person? No. If
Yeah,
I let all my anger out, I might feel a little crazy. I might like feel out of my normal state of consciousness. And so,
yeah,
and the fear around those things is very, very valid.
yeah. And take it one step further. And if I did act crazy, if I did do something dangerous, and I lose the love of the people around me, right? Because that's what you're actually afraid of. Like you said, it's like, if I do this, even if I don't think I'm crazy, but they think I'm crazy, it's like, well,
Hmm.
people don't want to hang out with crazy people. People don't want to hang out with dangerous people. So I will be alone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Which is the fear that so many of our fears actually boil
Boil
down
down to that.
to,
Yeah.
I will die alone.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Been there, done that. Not fun.
Yeah. So speaking of this sort of this dance between genders, something
Mhm.
that I see a lot. Unfortunately, at this moment in time, we are living after a good few thousand years of imbalanced patriarchy. I would call it,
Yep.
right. There's a lot of resentment between genders. There's a lot of lack of respect
Hmm.
between genders in both directions. There's
Hmm.
a big lack of support between genders.
Hmm.
And it's all completely understandable, right?
Yep.
Something that I see, I think women have felt oppressed for so long.
Uh-huh.
And then in many cases, have tried to gain back some power. And
Hmm.
sometimes in a really good, really healthy way. And sometimes it's in a form that was actually modeled by patriarchy, that is actually an attempt to be direct resistance to the structure
Yep.
by using the power models of the structure, which is power over as opposed to power with.
Yep.
And so then that can lead to emasculation, manipulation, and this isn't to shame anybody who does that. Most of us have learned to do this in some way, shape, or form, even if it's subtle.
Hmm.
Just like men have learned to subtly, whatever it is, disrespect women. Again, it might be very unconscious. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're bad women or bad men. It's
Yep.
the impact of a societal structure over time.
Yes.
And what I see happening here is because of this buildup of resentment and this buildup of, how do we stay in power within a structure that has taught us that one of us is going to be in power, that one, in order to be in power, I need to have power over.
Hmm.
What happens is that no one feels respected, no
Hmm.
one feels appreciated, no
Hmm.
one feels like they're truly revered for what it is that they bring,
Yeah.
for our truth, for our naturalness, whatever shape and form that might be. And it doesn't look like men as masculine energy and women as feminine energy. It just means between genders having this appreciation for one another.
Yeah.
And And I think being appreciated, we'll speak about men right now. I think feeling appreciated, feeling affirmed, feeling respected is so deeply craved by men, so
Yes.
deeply craved. And luckily, I do see more and more this simultaneous rising and healing and growing together,
Hmm.
creating a new structure where we're genuinely starting to appreciate each other for our differences, not
Hmm.
just in spite of, but because of our
Yeah.
differences. We're genuinely moving into that. And this this theme of men feeling appreciated, men feeling deeply, deeply appreciated. I think it is so, it's like a core human need. And it's
Hmm.
something that I hear so many men deeply longing for. Can you speak to that a little?
Yes. First of all, hearing, just to be direct with you, hearing a woman acknowledge how deep the desire it is for a man to feel appreciated, like you started talking and I felt like my heart wanting to cry. I was like,
Mhm.
ah, like, yes. When you talk about all the good men, right? We can define what all the good men means, but we'll use like a stereotypical mainstream idea. And he's like, okay, the guy, he goes to work, he's in the coal mines, getting it done, grubby hands, coughing up a lung, and then he comes home and he's like, here, babe, here's the bounty. Like, thank you for the dinner, and like, let's go to bed. I'm going to do it again tomorrow, right? And to me, what is absolutely unequivocally heartbreaking is to imagine that guy who's going out and doing that thing, and then he goes home and not even is he not appreciated, he's like nagged. And he's like, oh, I didn't like when you home 10 minutes later, I was checking your Instagram and that girl liked your picture. It's like, yo, please, this life that I'm building for you came as a result of effort, extensive effort, not just physically with my toil of my hands and my labor or whatever, but like mentally to like make a life for us. I had to fight myself. I had to fight my demons. I had to fight the work dynamics. Can you just love me for what I am trying to do here? Right? And anytime I see a man just like being like beaten down, even if it's like literally just like verbally or just like not acknowledged, it breaks my fucking heart. Like full stop, period, point blank. Because a friend of mine was telling me, she's like, oh yeah, I live with this couple, and I just hear every day the woman is like screaming at the man, like, you're not a man, you're a little bitch, and da da da. And the man just responds like, no, you're right. Like, I'm sorry. And he just like cowers. And like, even like now, like, it makes me want to cry, man. Like, oh my God. Like, no, no. I'm like, sure, I'm sure there's reasons for it and everything, but like, no, just absolutely not. And I know for myself, um, knowing the life that I've lived and the path that I've forged to get here, it's like I've like gone through enough of a gamut and like fought to become this person. And like just to have somebody like say, I see you, like I see that. Thank you. It's like you have no idea. That's all I fucking needed. Like all I needed, like to be seen. And I think a lot of times, you talk about resentment, which I think is a really big topic. I think like a lot of times, you hear about a guy being resentful. It's like because the woman doesn't appreciate all that he's done to like create this life for her. It's like, do you think this money just grew on trees? Do you think like it's easy to go out there day after day? We bring different things to the table, so can we appreciate each other for the things that we bring to the table?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And something I see so much within partnerships is that whether it's from this guy or the last guy or the generations before, chances are that woman is feeling super underappreciated, feeling like she's been cooking and cleaning all day, whatever it is. And what I see in in my work with couples is that once you both start appreciating each other, all of a sudden you are happy to do those things and you're lit up to do those things. And then the other person feels inspired to appreciate the other. And it can be challenging when there's resentment, but it is so deeply important. And if we love each other, both, yes, in partnership, but also just other humans, like if we love each other, to say, I appreciate what you're doing without needing, I appreciate what you're doing, but you don't see what I'm doing. To say, I see you, I see what you're doing.
Full stop.
That
Exactly.
also, it makes them feel appreciated, and it also allows them to have the space to come to you and say, I appreciate what you're doing, not because they have to, not because they owe you, but
Mm.
because they genuinely feel appreciated and
Yeah.
thus have that spaciousness to then appreciate you. And so once we start it, it's this back and forth. And the more we do it, and the more we can let go of that resentment and say, I see how hard you work,
Yes.
the
Exactly.
the more things, and that doesn't mean not talking about the resentments, that doesn't mean not working through whatever's challenging. I see
Yeah.
this in my relationship where it's like, I can sometimes have to remind myself, like, yeah, I can have a talk about what I'm frustrated for, but that doesn't change that I have to deeply, not I have to, I choose to deeply appreciate you
Mhm.
for what you are doing every single day, to say thank you
And really mean it.
and
Yeah.
really mean it.
Yeah. 100%. It's like if I feel slighted and unappreciated, like to ask me to go beyond my slight, to leave my bucket empty and then come over here and like fill your bucket. It's like, of course, I'm going to build resentment towards that.
Mhm.
That's what, like, of course, that's what's going to happen. Right. And so I think that, I mean, one of my favorite hobbies is acknowledging people. I'm
Mhm.
like, I love like that's so fun to me.
Yeah.
And as a coach, it's like yes, take people on all these emotional journeys and help them accomplish results in their life. It's like a lot of times I think one of the most useful things people get out of working with me is just feeling fully fucking seen for the
Yeah.
first time. It's like, hey man, I see how hard it was for you to fucking do that, and I get that it's difficult for you to do blank and da da da. Like, but fuck,
Mhm.
man, you're lighting me up watching you do that. People would just break down because they just feel seen for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, of course. If you don't feel seen by the person who literally sees you physically every day, it's like that's just building a case for resentment and
Yeah.
bitterness.
Truly. And it's contagious. It's contagious, and it's I don't want to say intoxicating because that almost has this feeling of like it takes you out of presence, but it feels so fucking good to appreciate. It feels
Yeah,
so
it,
good.
you
Every
win.
morning I wake up and poor Jeff is like, I like tell him all the things I love about him and how much amazing things he's doing in this world. And I'm like, I'm full of energy in the morning. And he's like, babe, I just maybe coffee first. I'm a little wily in the morning, but
I'm
truly,
like,
like,
I would love that. I don't need no coffee.
he
Don't
does.
have
He does love it.
like that's amazing. I mean, to be honest, it's like one of the questions that I was going to ask you, Fabi,
Yeah.
is like again, even you bring up the conversation of seeing men who want to be and deserve to be acknowledged, like, and feeling how much that moved me to hear a woman say that. I'm just curious, like, you're over here building a podcast is literally about men, and as far as I know, you don't fall into that category. So you're over here invested in taking care of and providing for a subsect of people that you are not, and you don't have any obligations to provide for and take care of and connect with and provide resources for. So like the fact that you're doing this is like I'm like, huh? What? Like glitch in the matrix type vibes, right? And I'm curious, like a really genuine question is like, why do you care? Like all the
Mm,
good men, you could be talking about like femininity and like let's celebrate being women and da da da. Like you could talk about anything.
mhm.
Why do you? And I know that you work with men specifically. Like why do you care?
Yeah.
Why do you do this?
Such a good question. Thank you for asking me that. For me, those don't even come separately. Like
Mm,
femininity, being a woman, like that comes and the celebration of that
mm,
comes alongside the celebration of men. Like we're not, it's not these two, we're not separate species. We're all doing this together. And for me, this is like my deepest joy, my deepest love. And And so many, I've seen so many women hurt by unhealthy
Mm,
men, and I've seen so many men hurt by unhealthy men, unhealthy women as well. But I've seen this so much, and for me, the response to that isn't, well, fuck men. The
yeah,
response is, wow, there must be a lot of pain there. There
yeah,
must be a lot of pain behind all of that for
mhm,
everyone involved.
mhm,
And so part of it is like, this is a really deeply important aspect of all humans growing together
mhm,
is, okay, wait, so many people who I talk to say they didn't have any examples of healthy men or masculinity in their lives, or they had a couple examples growing up, and
mhm,
like half of them were movie characters. That's an issue. That's an issue.
mm,
That's something that is so deeply right. It's like the patriarchy doesn't, the patriarchy, the systems, the ways that people look at men and perceive men and women, that doesn't just hurt women, it hurts men deeply, deeply, deeply,
yes,
deeply.
yeah,
And there are so many men who are so good out there. There are
mm,
so many incredible men, but we also live in a society that doesn't spend a lot of time focusing on the good in men.
mhm.
And so not as only is it not noticed and appreciated, but it also, if it's going to grow, it needs to be appreciated and celebrated. And why?
Exactly. Yes.
And I have so many close men in my life. I have four brothers. I have my father who is my biological father. I have my dad who raised me. I have deep, deep, deep friendships with men. Some of my very closest friends
Mhm,
are men. I have so many men in my life who I care so deeply about, who care so deeply about me, who
mhm,
take care of my heart in such an incredible way. And I'd be a different person without those connections. And I see and I hear what goes on for them. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about those things.
yeah,
And so it for me, it comes from, yes, a place of like, well, let's make shifts in the places where shifts needs to happen. And
mhm,
it's also me just being like, I fucking love y'all. Like, I love men, I really truly do, and I
yeah,
fucking love women so much. And they're not separate things. It's just a
yeah,
celebration of what's here. And this is where my life has led me, and what has felt like the truest thing for me to do on my path is this form of work and celebration and
mm.
conversation.
I really, again, back to this idea of speaking and trying to find the right words. I really want to find the right words to communicate what I feel like you need to hear in order to have your brilliance and your genius and how useful and necessary you are to the conversation reflected back to you. Like everything you just said is the only way that we move forward. And you are one of very few people who I feel like not only are aware of that, but also doing something about it. And holy shit, does that give me hope that, like, okay, we're not completely fucked as a species. Like to hear you do your work, but even as you describe it, it doesn't even sound like work. It literally just sounds like you actually do love men, which feels like, oh, thank you. We're not hated. Like you give me hope for not just women, not just for men, but that you give me hope for like humans, that we can do better things together. So thank you very much for that. And I think that an idea that kind of come up to me before is like, you're talking about this idea of like solving patriarchal issues with patriarchal responses or
Yeah.
like that kind of idea. And a lot of that's just like amygdala shit. It's like caveman shit. It's like, oh, you hit me with stick, so I hit you with stick, right? And it's just like he's just doing the same thing over and over again. And it's like, okay, we have to move from a kind of primitive problem to like very forward thinking solutions. And I think that what you're talking about is a forward thinking solution. I
Mm.
think the primitive response to, yes, a disproportionate amount of power that men had for a long time, the primitive response was like, okay, well, just fuck men. We hate them. And like feminism superpower and like just squash them. It's like, you're just changing this, the pendulum in the other direction and causing more problems. You're just causing different kind of problems, right? But what you're saying is like you're moving it from a primitive problem to like a very conscious solution, which is like, I love men. I don't happen to identify as one, but I love them and I
Yeah.
see them as people. And I think that in order for my subsect of people to best thrive and that subsect to thrive, we got to do it together.
Yeah.
So to hear you say that, to see you living it is like, just gives me hope for people and humans. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that acknowledgement. And when you just said that about the pendulum, I also want to acknowledge that when we talk about sort of broader energetics, sometimes that pendulum swing is actually very important.
Mhm.
So, for example, if there hadn't been a fight back within some of the feminist movements within the 50s, 60s, 70s, do I think that's the way to be in the most healthy, most balanced way? No. Did
Mhm.
it provide that pendulum swing that actually did create some massively important shifts
Mhm.
that then allows that pendulum swing to be smaller?
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. And so while it's like there are extremes, I also want to honor the pendulum in whatever way it swings on like a zoomed out, again, energetic level.
Yeah, yeah,
But I don't think that we're there anymore. I think that there's this opportunity now for us to find this balance, and it's not happening completely because it's not like it's a lot more than just one simple pendulum swinging. There are a
yeah,
lot of pendulums swinging in all different ways, but we have the opportunity to acknowledge each other, appreciate each other, respect
Mhm.
each other for our differences,
Mhm.
respect each other for just, simply put, like just our beingness and the fact that we all exist at the same time in this moment.
Yeah,
And we have the choice to do that, and everyone has the different way of going about that, and this is mine.
yeah. And there would be none of us if there wasn't both of us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like, I personally am not interested in living in a world in which it's just all men. It's like, first of all, we'd last 90 years and then we'd all be dead, right? So, first and foremost, just like it's not economically sustainable. And also, it's just like it just wouldn't be as interesting. And maybe there are women, I don't know, who might be like, oh, I just want to live in a world with all women. It's like, I feel like we'd all be losing out. We'd all be missing out. So, I think, like I said, without both of us, there would be none of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just had a thought, which is that as I'm thinking about all the different pendulums that are swinging, so there might have been this pendulum swing of like within the movement of feminism, but actually that pendulum was still swinging on the air of we're still utilizing some very patriarchal um, ways of going about things. So in a way, the pendulum was still over here, and then
Mhm.
I almost feel like the swing over to the other side. It's like the unhealthy masculine aspects, then the swing to the unhealthy feminine aspects is lack of direction, constant distraction,
Mhm.
scrolling for hours.
Yeah.
That's not healthy feminine energy. It's more like unhealthy active aggression and then unhealthy passivity.
Yes.
And it's like then we also need to find the balance right within ourselves, that pendulum swing of we're not being the aggressor, we're not being the passive nice guy,
Mhm.
whatever versions of that exist on both sides. There are tons.
Yeah.
We're actually finding the healthy relationship to both of those.
Mhm.
And then we get to swing on the pendulum in any given moment within
Yeah.
that. I'm getting a little out there with this one, but just
No,
thinking about all the different pendulums and how we engage with them, and we engage with them internally, and we also engage with them with each other, and it really
yeah.
comes down to reverence, respect, appreciation.
Yeah. Just don't get attached to either end of the spectrum, like a pendulum, right? It's like the pendulum is meant to keep swinging, right?
Yeah.
So if we like for example, like if anger is on one side of the pendulum, I'm like, oh my god, anger, that feels amazing. Fuck yeah,
Mm.
testosterone. And I'm like, maybe I should just be an angry person every day. It's like, whoa, hold on, I don't know about all that, right?
Mm.
It's like use that, let it be what it needs to be, and then every once in a while come back to the middle, and then you swipe the other side, and then you come back. It's just again,
Right.
the
So maybe it's
balance.
less about trying to minimize the pendulum swing and more about being very intentional about what the axis is of that the pendulum is swinging on, clarifying
Yes.
that axis itself. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like making sure that um, we're really milking this pendulum metaphor, but like it's like on the pendulum, making sure that there is a weighted ball on the end so it keeps swinging, right? It's like if I started up here and I let it go, it should drop, right? It shouldn't stay up here. It needs to be weighted so that it can go to the other side, and then come back to this side, and come back to this side. It needs to keep moving, shifting, and dancing. And if we get super hyper feminine and attached to that, it's like I don't think we're going to go anywhere as a society. And I think that if we get super hyper attached to hyper masculinity all the time, it's like, cool, we're just going to destroy ourselves. It's
Mm.
not very useful.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm curious, in your work that you do with people,
Mhm,
I know you have clients who you work with, you also give speeches, you talk to big groups.
mhm,
And when you work with your clients, I know you do some around sort of structural, how to create a system that really allows you to
mhm.
do your work in the best way possible,
Yep,
which for me is exactly what you were talking about at the beginning with that, creating the structure, creating those boundaries, creating
exactly.
those systems for you to work within. Can
Yeah.
you tell me a little baby bit more about what you do with your clients, how you work, what the essence is of that work?
Yeah, I would be happy to. Thanks for the question. So for me, every client starts with one question, which is, what do you want? Like, what do you want? What is it that is not happening now that it has to be a must in the future? Whether it's like you're losing weight, whether it's you're starting a business, whether you're in a relationship, whether you sleep better. Like, it doesn't matter what the thing is, but like, what actually, again, to this concept of being moved, like, what idea moves you that you're
Mm,
like, this is who I want to be, right? And I'm tired of not being that person. I'm tired of not doing that thing or having that thing. So we spend time identifying exactly what that is, because as I'm sure you know, sometimes it's not the surface level thing, it's the thing underneath it, right? You're like, I want $1 million. Like, well, why? Well, what's underneath that, right? So we get to the bottom of the thing that you actually want, and then we so that I feel like that's more of like the feminine, because you have to be in touch with yourself and your body and all these things. And then you move into like the masculine aspects, like, okay, cool, how do I build a infallible plan to make sure that that is a guaranteed result in 6 months? What do we need to do in on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, in order for you to get there, right? So it's like, cool, I want to leave my 9 to 5 and I want to start my own business. Cool, great. That means in 6 months, you want to make your first $10,000, right? Great, amazing. So that means at month 5, we need to have our first list of clients made. And it means that month 4, we need to have our website done. It means at month 3, you know what I mean? Just like really breaking it down. And then from there, because I feel like every lifestyle that you're trying to build is built on habits. So then we figure out, what are the daily habits that you need to be doing? Is it like, I just need to be running every day? I need to be talking to my wife every day. I need to, whatever it is. And
mm,
so my job is to help you identify the vision, build the plan, hold on to the commitment, and then in the interim, while we're going through those 6 months, identifying all the fears and all the blocks and all the confusion and all the consternation that's coming up that previously would have sent you running.
mm.
How can we keep you steady and committed to it? Because this is the life that you want to build.
Beautiful. And that's creating that healthy masculinity, that
Yep.
that structure for yourself with also the kindness to yourself, with understanding what's actually needed in order for me to feel safe and feel inspired and motivated and all of that.
Exactly. Right. And
Mm.
that's why I think that every session with a client, it's like there is a dance of like, is this more of like a masculine day? It's like, did you do the thing? Why didn't you do the thing? Right. Or sometimes a more of a feminine day is like, oh, cool. Like, you're really feeling low today, or you really feel like you're not going to be able to do it. Let's talk about it. Like, what's going on? Right. Like, so it's always a dance. And that's what keeps it fun for me, personally speaking.
Beautiful. So if
Yeah.
people are interested in working with you and also hearing you talk about things, how can people find you?
Yes. So if you're interested in working with me, imarituakli.com. So it's just my name. IMARITUAKLI.com. I haven't spelled my name in a while. Yeah. It kind of has like a
Has a
little,
little
yeah, it has a little music to it. I like that. Do that more often. It was great. And then as far as like, if you want to come see me speak, I usually post on my Instagram whenever I have like talks coming up. Like, I'll post like the flyers, or if I'm hosting a workshop, I'll post information there. Um, so yeah, probably the best way.
amazing. Well, thank you so much, Amari. I love hearing you think and having these conversations with you. I so appreciate the way that you do what you do. I love hearing your thought processes and the way that you approach all the different aspects of your life, really truly how you approach your work, how you approach your ideas, how you approach your relationships. It's so inspiring. It's so beautiful. So thank you so much for
Thank
being here, and also thank you for your appreciation and acknowledgement of me. That felt really, really good. So thank you. Thank you. Thank
Save it, rewatch it, put it on your TV at home because I meant every word.
you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Bye, y'all. Appreciate it.